Hello everyone, and welcome to week 6 of this year's community course on medieval and early modern food. My name is Dr. Will Green, and in this lecture I will be talking about banquets and banqueting in English Renaissance drama. This lecture is split into two parts. In the first, I will go over the role of the banquet in early modern English society, before turning to brief examinations of some key banqueting scenes from various examples from the drama of the period. Modern perceptions of early modern banqueting may well be coloured by representations of lavish feasts, of gorging and of gluttony. Think of a Tudor banquet, and we might well conjure up an image of an extravagant occasion with copious amounts of food, such as we might imagine a figure such as Henry VIII having taken great relish in. But such a view misunderstands what a banquet would have meant to people in the early modern period. The first definition for the word in the online edition of the Oxford English Dictionary is a feast, a sumptuous entertainment of food and drink, now usually a ceremonial or state feast, followed by speeches. Although the OED gives 1483 as the first use of the word in this context, this was not the most common meaning for early moderns. In fact, one of the words used in this definition, feast, would have been more commonly used to describe such an occasion. Placing ourselves in the context of early modern England, the OED's third definition, which it now considers obsolete in general use, is more relevant: a course of sweetmeats, fruit and wine, served either as a separate entertainment or as a continuation of the principal meal, but in the latter case, usually in a different room, a dessert. Indeed, in early modern England, a banquet usually meant a specific and very different kind of meal, often following a feast, but in a different room or even building, which concentrated on sweet foods of various kinds. These became highly fashionable events as sugar became much more common in Europe at the start of the 16th century. It was, in essence, a very grandiose form of a dessert course, and special banqueting houses were often built for them. An example of small banqueting turrets can be found at Longleat House in Wiltshire, which was constructed between the late 1560s and 1580 by the architect Robert Smithson. Special structures for banqueting can also be found at Callowden House in Warwickshire, Holdenby House in Northamptonshire, and elsewhere. Early modern banquets were elaborately choreographed events. They were not simply occasions for roistering and carousing, but were principally intended to demonstrate the ability of the host to spectacularly feed those in attendance. On stage, actors were choreographed, but at a banquet, it is not too much of a metaphor to say that the food itself was choreographed. Preparations were intense, and the banquet itself was usually highly elaborate. Banquets were themselves orchestrated like a piece of theatre, with every display, every entrance, and every exit planned down to a T. Elaborate scenery and decorations were made use of frequently. This is unsurprising, as banquets were often associated with major events such as weddings, but were also used for political occasions and important unions. Talented craftsmen were usually made use of to assemble the decorations, whereas particularly talented cooks or food sculptors ensured that the food itself was the centre of attention. Such events were then, at their core, opportunities for highly theatricalised performance. It was just as, if not more important, for guests to be supremely impressed by the event itself, as it was for them to enjoy the sweet foods on offer. That the banquet came to occupy such an important role in England's high society is reflected in Thomas Nash's words in his 1592 publication Piers Penniless, where he criticised how gluttony was being passed off under the guise of hospitality. It is not for nothing that other countries, whom we upbraid with drunkenness, call us bursten-bellied gluttons, for we make our greedy paunches powdering tubs of beef, and eat more meat at one meal than the Spaniard or Italian in a month. Although many members of an early modern theatre audience would not have had the opportunity to attend a banquet, they would almost certainly have been able to recognise such a scene on stage as a highly political social event. Furthermore, the theatricality of the banquet would have translated especially well into the environment of the play world. For many dramatists, especially from the mid-1580s onwards, the banquet proved to be a useful means of playing out crucial sections of their dramas, and such banqueting scenes have been calculated by Chris Meads to have occurred in 97 surviving plays from the period 1585 to 1642. More specifically, of tragedies from this period, 34 contain banquet scenes, of which 6 have 2 banquet scenes, and in non-tragedies, 63 contain banquet scenes, of which 9 have 2 banquet scenes. Banqueting scenes were made use of by Thomas Kidd, Christopher Marlowe, John Lilly, Robert Greene, George Chapman, Thomas Heywood, and many others. The flair and theatricality of the banquet became a popular, effective dramatic device as the early modern theatres continued to develop and innovate. An early example of such a banqueting scene being used to such a purpose occurs in Thomas Preston's circa 1561 tragedy, Cambyses, King of Persia. In scene 10 of this play, a group of characters attend a wedding banquet celebrating the marriage of Cambyses to his new queen, a woman he had only met and wooed in the previous scene. The banquet should nevertheless be one of celebration, but Preston subverts this expectation, transforming it into an opportunity for Cambyses to demonstrate his authority in front of a large group of characters. During the banquet, the new queen openly laments the murder of Smerdis, Cambyses' younger brother, which had occurred in scene 7. The queen's judgment of Cambyses' murder of Smerdis enrages Cambyses, who orders the queen's immediate execution. "O cursed caitiff, vicious, vile, I hate thee in this place. This banquet is at an end. Take all these things away. Before my face thou shalt repent the words that thou dost say. O wretch most vile, didst thou the cause of brother mine so tender the loss of him should grieve thy heart, he being none offender? It did me good his death to have, so will it to have thine. What friendship he had at my hands, the same even thou shalt find. I give consent and make a vow that thou shalt die the death, by cruel sword and murder fell, even thou shalt lose thy breath." 2 lords beg mercy for the queen, but they are silenced by a threat that they too imperil their lives with their pleading. The queen is then led off to execution. The celebration we might expect from this scene of banqueting is instead replaced with politics and scheming, becoming a show of cruel authority rather than a traditional festivity. The turn in Cambyses' attitude is sudden, unanticipated. In this play, the celebratory banquet is quickly replaced with an air of fear and horror. Preston's use of a banquet in Cambyses constitutes a relatively straightforward use of a banquet as a state occasion to propel his depiction of the tyranny of Cambyses. But later dramatists saw ways to subvert the very idea of a banquet in order to transgress the very notion of hospitality and good cheer. Of course, such an approach had been taken centuries before, in Seneca's Thyestes, in which the title character is tricked by his brother Atreus into feasting upon a meal fashioned from the flesh and blood of his own sons. Such material was copied by certain Elizabethan dramatists. Most famously, at the end of Shakespeare and Peele's early 1590s play Titus Andronicus, the Queen of the Goths, Tamora, is tricked into attending a banquet where she ends up eating meat carved from the flesh of her slaughtered sons, Chiron and Demetrius, with Titus springing the truth upon her as a surprise later in the event. "Where are her sons?" asks the Emperor Saturninus. "Why, there they are, both baked in this pie, whereof their mother daintily hath fed, eating the flesh that she herself hath bred." A similar banquet is later presented by John Marston in his 1601 play Antonia's Revenge. where the villainous Piero is confronted with a dish containing the limbs of his infant son, Giulio. For some dramatists, the expected good cheer of a banquet was a prime occasion for their characters to exact something far more delicious: revenge. One dramatist, however, seems to have had far more frequent recourse to the use of banquet scenes than any other writer of the period, Thomas Middleton. As Meads puts it, Middleton used the banquet scene to telling effect as a device with which to open the action of a play and overcome the problem of introducing a large number of important characters in a short space without losing the audience's interest or understanding. Indeed, Middleton used the banquet to shock his audience through the staging of gruesome tragedy, as in the onstage cannibalism of his play The Bloody Banquet, co-authored with Thomas Dekker, and as a means of bringing multiple characters back on stage to bring a work to a speedy resolution, as in the rapid series of murders carried out at a banquet in the final scene of his Revenger's tragedy. Interestingly, however, Middleton was also a master of using paired banquet scenes in a contrasting manner to signal an alteration in the tone of a particular drama. This twinned banquet structure is particularly striking in a strange play, part tragedy, part satire, which Middleton co-authored with Shakespeare at some point between 1605 and 1607, Timon of Athens. Indeed, in this play, a second banqueting scene, Act 4, Scene 1, written by Shakespeare, noticeably reflects and inverts the manner and style of the first banqueting scene, Act 1, Scene 2, written by Middleton. Interestingly, as John Jowett points out, it appears that Middleton later went back over the draft of the play and reworked Shakespeare's writing of the second banquet scene to better gel with his own representation of Timon's interactions with his many false friends and creditors in the earlier banqueting scene. Indeed, Act 1, Scene 2 of Timon, attributed entirely to Middleton, is characterized by good cheer, with Timon being more than happy to share his bounty with those he perceives to be his dear friends. Here, although the audience itself is perfectly aware of how Timon's wealth and generosity is being abused by those in attendance, Timon himself is entirely unaware of the true motivations of his banquet's attendees, even dismissing the wise warnings of one that means him well, Apemantus, with dismissive comments such as, "Fie, thou art a churl, you've got a humour there does not become a man." The banquet of Act 4, Scene 1, on the other hand, attributed mostly to Shakespeare, but likely with some reworking by Middleton, is a far more belligerent affair. Timon has, by this point in the play, suffered rejection by his friends when he was required to send his steward to visit them to request financial aid for his bankrupted self, and he illustrates this change in his outlook from his abundant philanthropy in Act 1 to his furious misanthropy in Act 4, by serving the attendees bowls containing only water and stones and dismissing them all in very aggressive language. "Thou knot of mouth friends, live loathed and long, most smiling, smooth, detested parasites, courteous destroyers, affable wolves, meek bears, you fools of fortune, trencher friends, time's flies, cap and knee slaves, vapours, and minute jacks." To me, Middleton's most significant contribution to this scene is a passage which occurs at the conclusion of his second banquet, after Timon has left the stage, leaving behind a throng of shocked dinner guests. Here, Middleton takes the opportunity to provide noteworthy commentary upon the alteration Timon's bounty has undergone between this scene and the earlier banquet scene. "How now, my lords? Know you the quality of Lord Timon's fury? Push! Did you see my cap? I have lost my gown. He's but a mad lord, and naught but humours sway him. He gave me a jewel the other day, and now he has beat it out of my hat. Did you see my jewel? Did you see my cap? Here it is. Here lies my gown. Let's make no stay. Lord Timon's mad. I feel it upon my bones. One day he gives us diamonds, the next stones." Scholars generally agree that Shakespeare hired Middleton as his co-author on Timon of Athens, largely because of the younger dramatist's expertise in the writing of satirical city comedy, thereby working with Middleton to benefit from his experience in a particular style of writing. And the theme of a lead character suffering immense financial debt certainly recalls the similar plot point concerning the character of Theodorus Whitgood in Middleton's A Trick to Catch the Old One, a play which had likely been written as recently as 1605. Considering how Timon makes use of two contrasting banqueting scenes, it is possible that this was another aspect of Middleton's style as a dramatist which Shakespeare wanted to bring into this genetically hybridized tragedy. As Meads thus writes of the two banquet scenes in Timon, the two scenes are structurally a pair, the first being a statement of the accepted Athenian hierarchy, and the second depicting the breaking down of that order. Without the first banquet scene, the second would lose a good deal of its dramatic impact and relevance, and without the second, the first would appear a languid and lengthy self-indulgence. But Middleton also made use of paired scenes of celebratory banquets elsewhere in his surviving canon of works. In scene 4 of his 1611 play No Wit, No Help Like a Woman's, the character Weatherwise holds a banquet in honour of Lady Goldenfleece, the widow whom he intends to woo, albeit for very dishonest purposes. To this event, Weatherwise also invites other potential suitors who, in Victoria Yeoman's words, similarly covet the widow's wealth. Yet although Weatherwise feels confident of success in this scene, stating, "My almanac told me true how I should fare," it is another female character, Mistress Lowwater, who, disguising herself as a man, wins the widow's hand in marriage. The banquet in scene 4 is then followed by a second banquet, the event accompanying the wedding masque of scene 9, a celebratory event which Middleton subverts to become the opportunity for Lady Goldenfleece's suitors to exact their revenge. Similarly, in Middleton's 1621 tragedy Women Beware Women, the banquet held during Act 3, Scene 2, which takes place at the behest of the Duke, marks the culmination of Livia's scheming up to that point in the play. This is then followed by the tragic events of the Masque, which is held during Act 5, Scene 1, of which Meads writes that it is not straining credibility to suggest that the earlier large-scale ensemble scene, also a lavish display of the court at leisure, would be recalled to the audience's mind. The banquet scene in Act 3 sets in motion the events leading up to the apocalyptic finale and the punishment of all the miscreants for their lust. The earlier banquet scene of Act 3, Scene 2 had passed relatively uneventfully, but the masque in Act 5, Scene 1 ends with the play's female protagonist Bianca drinking poison, tasting death in a cup of love, as she says at line 262. In both of these examples, No Wit, No Help Like a Woman's and Women Beware Women, we can therefore witness Middleton's mastery of using such paired scenes in his own dramas to propel the dramatic action to its ultimate conclusion. Thank you all for watching this lecture. I look forward to meeting you in the Q&A on Friday.